It was the kind of quiet evening that painted the world in shades of orange and purple. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft golden glow to cling to the last of the fading light. The cozy little cabin nestled on the edge of the forest seemed almost like a part of the landscape itself, its wooden walls worn by years of weather, but filled with warmth inside. For the Thompson family, it was just another peaceful night in their secluded home. The children, Lucy and Tim, were finishing their homework at the kitchen table while their parents, Sarah and Jack, prepared a simple dinner. The only sounds were the occasional clink of dishes and the gentle rustle of the wind outside, a reminder of the wild world that surrounded them. But as the last remnants of daylight faded away, a sound came from outside, a soft, almost imperceptible whimper, barely audible over the wind. Sarah paused in the kitchen, her hands stilling over the stove. She tilted her head, listening carefully. "Did you hear that?" she asked Jack, who was pouring a glass of water at the counter. Jack furrowed his brow. "Hear what? I thought I heard something. Like a cry?" Sarah said, her voice trailing off as she glanced out the window. At first, Jack shrugged, assuming it was some animal in the woods. The family lived close to the forest, and sounds of wildlife were common. But then the cry came again, louder this time, unmistakably coming from outside. It wasn't the call of a bird or the rustling of a deer in the brush. This was different. It was almost human. "I'll go check," Jack said, setting down his glass and reaching for his jacket. Tim and Lucy, who had been caught in the middle of their math problems, exchanged nervous glances. Tim, the older of the two at 12, spoke up first. Is it an animal, Dad?" "I don't know yet," Jack answered, though his voice carried a tinge of uncertainty. "Stay inside, okay?" With that, Jack stepped outside, the cool evening air greeting him as he walked toward the sound. The faint cry led him to the side of the cabin, just beyond the porch where the forest began. He couldn't see anything at first, just the tall trees swaying in the breeze and the fading light of day. But then, as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he spotted something small and huddled by the base of a tree. It was a bear cub. Its fur was thick and soft, but its tiny body trembled in the cold. Jack's heart sank as he took a few cautious steps toward it. "Hey there, little one," he murmured, his voice soft but filled with concern. The cub didn't run or retreat. Instead, it looked up at him with big wide eyes, eyes that were filled with something beyond mere fear. There was an overwhelming sense of desperation in them. The cub whimpered again, this time in a way that tugged at Jack's heartstrings. It was clear that something was wrong. "I'm here to help," Jack said, kneeling down slowly, making sure not to scare the cub. The creature's trembling intensified, and Jack could see that it was covered in dirt and scratches. There was no sign of its mother, and that worried him deeply. Wild bear cubs rarely wandered off alone at such a young age. They were always with their mothers. The cub let out another sound, almost as if trying to communicate, but Jack couldn't make sense of it. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Sarah, you'd better come out here," he called, his voice rising with urgency. Within moments, Sarah was standing beside him, her face etched with concern. She gasped when she saw the cub, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Jack!" "What happened to it?" "I don't know. It looks lost, scared," Jack said, his gaze fixed on the cub. The more he observed, the more it seemed that the cub was not just lost. It was asking for help. Its big eyes held a deep sadness, a feeling of helplessness that seemed far too human for an animal so young. The cub's eyes flickered toward Sarah as she crouched down next to Jack. It took a hesitant step forward and let out a soft growl that was barely audible, as though it was trying to speak. Sarah's heart ached. She reached out a hand, instinctively offering comfort. "What's wrong, little one? You're safe here. We'll help you." The cub took a step closer, its ears twitching as if it understood the kindness in her tone. And then, unexpectedly, it did something strange. It walked slowly up to the window, its little paws scraping lightly against the wooden siding, and paused there. It looked inside at the warm glow from the cabin, at the family within, then back to Sarah and Jack, its gaze filled with desperation. The message was clear. It wasn't just lost. It needed something more. Lucy and Tim had been watching from the window, and they gasped as they saw the cub standing there, almost like it was asking for help, its big eyes looking straight into theirs. "Mom! Dad! What's happening? Why is it outside like that?" Lucy asked, her voice trembling. Jack stood up, turning to Sarah with a troubled expression. "This isn't normal, Sarah. A bear cub shouldn't be out here alone." Sarah nodded. "I agree. We have to do something." But what could they do? Neither of them had any experience with wild animals, let alone bear cubs. There was no one nearby who could help. It was late, and the nearest wildlife rescue was miles away. For a long moment, the family just stood there, looking at the little bear cub who seemed to be pleading with them. The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. The family had never imagined something like this would happen. But here it was, an innocent creature in need of help, standing right outside their window. And so, as the night deepened, the Thompson family made a decision that would change their lives forever. They would help the cub. The decision to help the bear cub was made in an instant. Yet the Thompson family felt a mix of apprehension and determination. As the evening wore on, they found themselves gathered together in the warmth of the cabin, discussing what to do next. The cub remained outside, still sitting near the base of the tree, watching them with its large, pleading eyes. Jack paced back and forth, trying to think of a plan. "We can't just leave it out there, but we can't bring it inside either. It's too wild for that." "Could it be sick?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with worry. "Look at how it's acting, like it's in distress." "It could be," Jack said, his tone filled with uncertainty. "Or maybe it's just scared, alone without its mother. But we don't know what we're dealing with. If it's sick, it could be dangerous for all of us." Lucy and Tim, who had been quietly listening, exchanged nervous glances. The idea of a wild animal in their backyard was both thrilling and frightening. Lucy, who was 8, spoke up. "What if it doesn't have a mom anymore? What if it's all alone? It looks like it needs someone." Her words struck a chord with both Sarah and Jack. They had been debating the logistics of what to do, but the simple truth of Lucy's statement reminded them of the real reason they were contemplating this, because the cub needed help, and no one else was around to give it. "We have to figure out what it needs," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I can't stand the thought of leaving it out there like that." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We'll have to make a call. I'll try reaching the Wildlife Rescue Center. It's late, but maybe they'll be able to send someone." As Jack made the call, Sarah and the kids continued to watch the cub through the window. The bear cub had stopped crying, but it hadn't moved much. It seemed to be waiting for something, perhaps a sign of trust from the family, something that would tell it wasn't alone anymore. The call didn't bring the immediate help they had hoped for. The Wildlife Center was closed for the night, and the emergency line was directed to a voicemail. Jack left a message, feeling increasingly helpless as time ticked by. What were they supposed to do in the meantime? Should they just leave the cub outside to fend for itself? Or should they try something else? As the hours passed, the decision was made. They couldn't wait any longer. Jack and Sarah knew that leaving the cub outside was not an option. Even if help was on its way, they had no idea when that would be, and the cub was clearly in distress. After a quiet conversation, the family decided to approach the cub cautiously. They would do their best to offer warmth and comfort, at least until help arrived. But what if there was no one to help? What if they had to take responsibility for this little creature themselves? Armed with blankets, food, and a few old towels, Jack and Sarah ventured outside. The kids stayed inside, watching from the window, their faces pressed against the glass. They were scared for the bear cub, but also excited by the idea of helping it. Jack was the first to approach the cub, moving slowly so as not to startle it. "It's okay, little one," he said softly. "We're not going to hurt you. We just want to help." The cub eyed him warily, its ears twitching as it followed his movements. It let out a low growl, but it didn't move away. It seemed exhausted, its small body hunched with fatigue. As Jack got closer, the cub sniffed the air, clearly registering his scent. Its eyes remained wide, filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Jack knelt down slowly, holding out a piece of bread from their dinner table. "Here," he said softly, offering the food. "We won't hurt you. We promise." For a long moment, the cub stared at the bread, then at Jack's outstretched hand. Slowly, hesitantly, it took a step forward. Its tiny paws scraped against the dirt as it sniffed the bread before gingerly nibbling at it. It wasn't much, just a simple piece of bread, but to the cub it seemed like the only thing that mattered in the world. "Look, it's eating!" Lucy gasped from the window. She turned to Tim, her face lighting up with hope. "Maybe we can really help it, Tim." "We have to." Tim, who had been quiet and a little unsure about everything, nodded. "We have to. It's all alone." Sarah stood by Jack's side as he continued to offer the cub food. She placed a blanket on the ground near them, hoping the cub would settle onto it. At first, the cub seemed hesitant, but as it ate, its posture relaxed just a little. Jack looked up at Sarah. "I don't know if we should bring it inside tonight. It's still wild and I don't want to make things worse, but we can at least give it shelter." Sarah nodded. "Let's set up something outside. Maybe we can keep it warm until we hear back from the rescue center." The night wore on, and the Thompson family worked together to create a safe space for the cub. They found an old dog crate in the garage and placed blankets and towels inside, trying to make it as comfortable as possible. Jack placed a large bowl of water nearby, hoping the cub would drink, and they kept the porch light on so they could monitor it through the window. Inside the cabin, Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection to the little bear. She sat by the window for hours, watching the cub curl up in its makeshift bed, its eyes half closed as if exhausted from the ordeal. Her heart ached for the cub, imagining the loneliness it must have felt in the wilderness, separated from its mother. She thought of her own children, of how they were always together, how they were always cared for. She felt a surge of maternal instinct, not just for her own kids, but for this little cub as well. She didn't know how or why this bear had ended up in their lives, but she was determined to help it. As the hours passed, the cub drifted into a deep sleep, its small body rising and falling with each slow breath. The family stayed vigilant, checking on it frequently, hoping the wildlife rescue would call back soon. As dawn broke, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, the cub woke up, stretching its small limbs. It yawned, a surprisingly endearing sight that made Sarah's heart swell. But there was something new in the cub's eyes, something different from the fear and desperation it had shown the night before. There was a sense of calm, as if it knew that it had found a safe place. But then, as the family gathered in the kitchen for breakfast, they heard something strange, a soft, almost pleading sound from the direction of the cub's resting spot. Sarah rushed to the window, her heart pounding. What was it? Was the cub hurt? But when she looked outside, the cub wasn't alone. It was sitting by the crate, facing the woods. It let out a low growl, but this time it wasn't directed at them. It was directed at something in the forest. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she looked closer. The cub's head was tilted, its eyes focused on something unseen, as though it were calling for help. And that's when it hit her. The cub wasn't just alone in the wilderness. It was searching for something, or someone. It wasn't just asking for help. It was asking for them to help bring its family back. The realization hit Sarah hard. This little bear cub wasn't just seeking help for its own survival. It was hoping that someone could bring its family back. The cry it had made earlier wasn't one of distress about being alone, but one of longing. It wasn't just about food, warmth, or safety. It was about finding its loved ones, about being reunited with the family it had lost. Sarah couldn't ignore the tug at her heart. The cub's search for its family mirrored her own desire to ensure that her own children would always feel loved and protected. It was the universal need for belonging and love that spoke to her deeply. She glanced over at Jack, who had just stepped into the room, and saw the concern written on his face. He had heard the noise too, the growl, the calling. He knew what it meant. "I think we have to do something more," Sarah said softly. "The cub's not just asking for food or shelter, Jack. It's asking us to help find its family." Jack paused, his expression conflicted. "But how? We can't just go into the woods and start searching. Bears are territorial, and it could be dangerous for us. We don't know if its family's even out there." "I know," Sarah replied, "but I don't think we can leave it here knowing that it's calling for something. What if the cub's family's out there and we can help? What if they're looking for it too?" Jack thought about it for a moment, then sighed. We don't know what we're dealing with, Sarah. But, I understand. It's not just a bear to us anymore. It's a lost soul, and we have to help it. The decision was made. The family spent the next few hours preparing for what would become an unexpected journey. They packed supplies, water, snacks, and extra blankets in case they needed to camp out. Jack carried a map of the nearby forest, marking areas they knew were dense with trees and difficult to navigate. They were going to search for the cub's family. Lucy and Tim were both excited and nervous. They couldn't imagine what it would be like to venture into the woods in search of a bear family, but they were also eager to help the little creature they had come to care for. "Do you think we'll find them, Mom?" Lucy asked as she clutched her jacket tightly around her small frame. "I don't know, sweetheart," Sarah said gently, "but we have to try. If we don't, we'll never know. And I think we owe it to that little cub to give it a chance." The woods outside the Thompson home were thick with towering trees and tangled underbrush, a maze of greenery that hid many secrets. The forest had always been a place of mystery and adventure for the Thompson children, but today it felt more like a daunting unknown. Jack led the way with the cub close behind, its small form following them obediently, as if it somehow knew this was its chance. Its eyes flickered between the family and the woods, its paws leaving small imprints in the soft earth as it walked along. Tim had a flashlight in hand, scanning the trees with wide eyes, while Lucy walked closely beside Sarah, clutching her hand tightly. It was a surreal moment. The family was walking through the forest, not on a typical hike or adventure, but on a mission to reunite a lost soul with its family. They walked for hours, the silence of the woods broken only by the sounds of their footsteps and the occasional chirp of a distant bird. The forest felt vast, the trees reaching high above them, like sentinels guarding the secrets of the wilderness. The cub, though small and young, moved with determination. It stopped only occasionally to sniff the ground, its nose twitching as if it were searching for something. At times it would pause and listen carefully, its large ears turning in every direction, trying to catch a sound. After several hours, they reached a clearing near a small creek. The cub stopped here, sniffing the air intently. Its ears flicked as it looked toward the far side of the clearing, and for a moment, the family thought they saw a flicker of hope in its eyes. "Do you think it's sensing something?" Tim whispered, his voice barely audible. Jack nodded, his heart racing. "Maybe. We should keep moving." They continued along the creek, now moving more cautiously. The cub's behavior became more erratic, darting back and forth, its paws brushing against the damp ground as it followed an invisible trail. Then they heard it, a rustling in the bushes nearby, the sound of something larger moving through the underbrush. Jack froze, holding his breath, and the cub paused as well, its body tensing with alertness. It let out a low growl, one that wasn't a sign of aggression, but of something deeper, fear mixed with hope. "Is it?" Sarah began, but she couldn't finish the sentence. Jack held up a hand to signal everyone to stay quiet. Slowly, cautiously, they moved toward the noise. As they approached, the rustling grew louder, and then, suddenly, from behind a thick patch of bushes, two larger shapes emerged. It was another bear, a mother and another cub. The family froze, hearts racing. The mother bear was massive, her fur dark and thick, and her eyes locked onto the Thompson family with a protective glare. Her cub, only slightly larger than the cub they had been helping, was standing beside her, looking curiously at the humans. But there was no mistaking the bond between them. They were a family. The cub that had been following them immediately ran forward, a small cry escaping its throat. The mother bear responded with a low, rumbling growl, and the two cubs met in the middle of the clearing. They nuzzled each other for a brief moment, the reunion bringing a wave of relief to the family. The mother bear looked toward the Thompsons, her gaze still watchful, but there was no hostility. Instead, there was something almost grateful in her eyes, as if she understood what they had done for her cub. "We did it," Lucy whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "We helped bring them together." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, her own emotions overwhelming her. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing they had helped reunite this family. She looked at Jack, who was standing beside her, his face full of emotion too. "They're together again," Jack said softly, his voice filled with awe. After the reunion, The family knew their mission had come to an end. They had done what they could. The cub was no longer alone, and the mother bear was taking it back into the wild, where it belonged. The family stood in the clearing for a few moments, watching the bears disappear into the woods, knowing that the cycle of life would continue. As they made their way back to the cabin, the family was silent, each person lost in their thoughts. It had been an emotional journey, one that brought them closer together and deepened their understanding of the world around them. When they returned home, the house felt different. There was a sense of peace that hadn't been there before, as if helping the cub had healed something inside them all. They knew that their lives would never be the same after the events of the past few days. And as Sarah sat down with her family around the dinner table, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. They had helped a little bear find its way back to its family, and in doing so, they had found something precious too. A reminder of the power of love, compassion, and the deep connections that tie all living creatures together. The Thompsons had not just helped a bear, they had helped themselves. After the bears had vanished into the forest, the Thompson family returned to their home with a sense of fulfillment. But they also found themselves questioning their place in the world. Their once ordinary lives now seemed filled with meaning, knowing that they had helped a little cub reunite with its family. But the journey didn't just end with the bears. It had awakened something deeper in each of them. Sarah sat by the window, looking out at the night sky. The stars twinkled faintly, and the moon cast a silver glow over the forest that now seemed so much more alive to her. She reflected on the journey they had just completed. They had set out to find the bear's family, but in doing so, they had found something within themselves. The love and compassion they had shown for the cub made her realize that there were parts of herself she hadn't truly paid attention to in years. She had become so caught up in the day-to-day routines of life, work, housework, errands, that she had forgotten what it felt like to truly connect with nature and the creatures around her. The forest had reminded her that there was more to life than just the tasks at hand. It had reminded her to be present in the moment, to feel empathy, and to see beyond the surface of things. But there was something else she hadn't expected to find in this journey, something deeper that had grown in her heart. She realized that the cub wasn't just a lost animal, it was a reflection of the human condition. It had been searching for something it didn't even know it was missing, just like all humans do at some point. The search for family, for belonging, for love. And Sarah had helped it find that. She felt deeply connected to that experience. Jack stood by the door, his hands resting on the frame as he looked out at the same forest that had held so many secrets for them. His mind replayed the events over and over, the moment when they had first seen the cub's face at their window, its eyes full of fear and hope. He had never expected to be part of something so meaningful. The experience had shifted his perspective on life. He had always prided himself on being a pragmatic man, someone who looked at things logically. But this journey had tested his beliefs and challenged his view of the world. There were things in life that didn't have clear answers or explanations. Things like love, family, and the unspoken bond that ties them all together. He had learned that not everything could be solved by logic. Sometimes the only thing that mattered was doing what felt right. As he reflected on the journey, Jack also thought about how much his children had grown during this adventure. Tim and Lucy had faced fear with courage, and they had learned to look beyond themselves to help someone in need. It made him proud to see them mature into young people who understood the importance of kindness, empathy, and responsibility. Tim sat on the porch, leaning back in the rocking chair and staring up at the stars. He had always been the adventurous one in the family, the one who loved exploring the woods and finding new places to go. But this journey had changed him in ways he hadn't expected. It wasn't just about discovering the world around him anymore. It was about understanding the importance of compassion, of doing things that mattered for the greater good. He thought about the little bear cub and how, despite its fear and vulnerability, it had trusted them to help. Tim had learned that it didn't matter how small or insignificant a person, or in this case, an animal, might seem. Every life had value, and every soul deserved to feel safe and loved. He had always looked up to his dad as a figure of strength and wisdom, but now more than ever, Tim felt that they were all in this together. He realized that his family had grown not just in numbers but in spirit. They had faced something bigger than themselves and had come out the other side stronger for it. Lucy was lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events in her mind. She couldn't quite comprehend how everything had unfolded. It had felt like something out of a dream. One minute, they were helping a lost bear cub, and the next they were standing in the middle of the forest, watching as the cub reunited with its family. What struck her the most was how the cub's eyes had shone when it saw its mother again. The pure joy, the sense of belonging, the relief. It was something Lucy could feel deep in her heart. She understood in that moment that family wasn't just about blood or biology, it was about the people or animals who love and care for you, who protect and nurture you. Lucy had always known her family loved her, but seeing the bond between the cub and its mother made her appreciate it on a deeper level. She felt a newfound sense of gratitude for her parents, her brother, and even their home. It was a reminder that family was something to be cherished, not just taken for granted. Days passed, but the memories of that day remained fresh. The Thompsons continued with their everyday lives, but there was a subtle shift in their interactions. They no longer rushed through their days or took things for granted. The experience in the forest had bonded them in ways they couldn't have anticipated. One afternoon, Sarah suggested they visit the forest again, not in search of the bear family, but just to walk, to breathe, and to reconnect with the place that had changed them. The family walked through the trees once more, this time without the pressure of searching for anything. They allowed themselves to simply be present, appreciating the beauty of the woods, the rustling leaves, the scent of pine, the distant calls of birds. As they walked, Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. The forest, once an intimidating unknown, now felt like a familiar, nurturing place. It was a part of their world, just as their home and their family were. They found a small clearing and sat down, the sunlight filtering through the trees and casting a warm glow on their faces. Jack wrapped his arm around Sarah, and Tim and Lucy sat beside them, quietly enjoying the moment. For the first time in a long while, the family felt truly whole.